Welcome back to the Financial Symmetry Show. Happy to be with you again this week. Chad Smith and Mike Eklund with you again. The team is reunited, Mike, right, for an important topic that we've gotten good questions from clients on, and we typically get these every year around this time. The spring season is here. The NCAA tournament is now over. The pollen is very high in North Carolina, and we've had tons of rain. So that means graduation is right around the corner. So today we put together some tips that we feel are pretty common and evergreen, but can really speak to those that are just graduating from college. So maybe this is an episode, if you're a client, you can send it to a child of yours or a family friend that may be going through this, or, hey, you may be going back to school in middle life, right? And these things can still resonate and remind you of those things that you want to tackle right after you've kind of graduated and are thinking about setting things up. So, Mike, let's jump through here. I know we typically have a disclaimer that we'll walk through, and we'll have that in our video portion of this show. But what we're going to walk through today typically is the introduction, just giving you some thoughts on why we put together this topic today, going through some of the top tips and questions that we'll get, and then give you some feedback, some resources too, if you'd like, because typically for young graduates, right, reading long books on these topics has not always been the best strategy for implementation and modification of their behavior. So we're hoping that this could be a bite-sized way to get some of those tips and go ahead and get moving on the right foot. And then we'll share some of those books if you do want to read further at the end. So let's jump into it, Mike, with our first slide.
Yeah, and I would say before I jump in there, that is really the purpose of this is, we do have clients that ask, hey, my son or daughter is graduating college. Can you provide a book? And to be honest, as Chad mentioned, not every recent college graduate is going to want to read a 200-plus page book on personal finance, which I understand. I also have 4 kids myself, so my plan would be when they graduate, I would be able to provide this, let's say, 30-minute approximately podcast video, and they can kind of learn, I'd say everything, but let's say 80 to 90% of things to focus on as they start their financial journey.
Yes.
So with that, we're really going to jump into the top tips. So these are the different tips. It's not any particular order, but these are things that as a recent college graduate that would help with making your smart financial decisions. So to start with, this is not a tip, but this is just who we are. So Chad is obviously a financial advisor at Financial Symmetry, and I am as well. So we help people on a daily basis make smart financial decisions. And really the purpose why, you just graduated college or you're in your 20s and you're like, why should I care? I mean, I have a paycheck, I get paid, I can enjoy the money, because the decisions you make today are going to make a big impact on your future self. How much can you spend in the future? When can you stop working? What things you can do? And as the quote here below from Jonathan Clements mentioned, a lot of people will say, hey, I want to be rich, but really the goal, as you find as you get later in life, is just enough money to lead the life you want. And smart decisions you make when you're young will allow you to lead that life later on, because you'll have that money and the stability and peace of mind that you're okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is undervalued when you're young is flexibility later on in life. Not only financially, actually, we were just talking before the show, health-wise too, but from a financial perspective, it is incredibly difficult to delay gratification. So that's a theme that we'll talk through today. But if you can set these steps up and take these tips and kind of get it off on the right foot, that makes making smart financial decisions so much easier. So that's our goal with this episode.
All right. So the first one, this is a little bit different than what many could expect. Now, you just graduated college, you're in your 20s, you're young, you have plenty of time on your hand. It's invest in yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's really, the impact of additional designations, certifications, education, networking at conferences, local events, getting mentors, being able to increase your salary and your bonuses over time via these opportunities when you're young. Because as Chet and I were joking at lunch, we both have kids, we don't have a lot of free time. When you have that time, it's great to do these things, because they only can, from a benefit for you from a compound interest will only be a huge benefit over the long term. So the first one is invest in yourself and be able to sell yourself, because that's the reality is you have to be able to communicate to an employer that why you are worth the money and why you're worth more in case you're asking for more money.
Yeah. And a good reminder here is these things take time. And that's often the hard part. If you keep delaying down the road, you have to study, you have to get these certifications, you have to invest time in the knowledge. And then down the road, it it can become second nature in some of your responses and the questions you ask and the way you handle yourself. So all of these things stack up and compound just as your investments will. These investments also compound and make things much easier for you as you're presenting yourself and your ideas, because selling your ideas is going to be a major aspect advancing in your career path.
Exactly. And so think about it. If you have, we'll be talking a lot about savings during this video and podcast, but the reality is if it costs, $1,000 or $2,000 to obtain additional designation or certification, you're not sure you should do it or not, but it will help your long-term career in terms of your salary and your marketability to other employers. It's worth every penny. And so that's the key thing. Don't focus so much on the short-term cost on the investment in yourself as a long-term benefit.
Yeah, because it can be a deterrent. It can seem like a lot of money in the beginning, potentially when you're young, but it's a great investment over the long run.
So yes, number one, invest in yourself. You're young. This is the time to do it. The second one, and you probably heard this before, hopefully your parents have mentioned to you, but you really want to avoid credit card debt. I think as our day jobs as financial planners, the number one kind of issue I see that causes, people to be, take off on the wrong foot on their financial life is they have credit card debt they can't pay off on a monthly basis. And that credit card debt compounds via high interest rate, and it grows and grows and grows, and it just gets out of control. And so it's very important that you pay off the balance in full each month, because typically whatever you don't pay off, the interest rate can be 20% plus of the unpaid balance. I highly recommend, you'll see this also in the slide deck here or the recording, is to automate those payments. You don't have to think about it. They automatically come out of your bank account on X day of the month. And then also another reason to do that, we'll talk a little bit about, is your credit score. So your credit score is going to impact your ability to get a car loan, to get a mortgage. And if you don't miss payments in your credit cards, you will have a higher credit score, which means the more eligibility you'll have for those loans and the lower interest payment you'll pay.
And I'm sure you're thinking, I'm listening to a personal finance. I mean, okay, I know this, right? I've heard this, and there's so much personal finance information out there at this point. But when you're young, delaying the gratification is very difficult. And it's much easier to say yes to a lot of spending decisions. And the credit card makes it so much easier to spend. And with no limit in many situations, you could get multiple credit cards. And so the lifestyle creep aspect that we've talked about too in other episodes, we may be talking about that further here as well, is you spend more as you age, right? You start to move into neighborhoods, things become more attractive to you, more expensive, and then it can easily get to where you're just putting everything on the credit card and you don't realize how much you're running up, and then the income may not be enough to meet the credit card. So putting this habit into practice early can set up that behavior that can benefit you for many years down the road.
Exactly. Avoid credit card debt. If you don't hear anything else, please, one thing.
Yeah.
Especially if you're my children and you're listening to this as well. The next one.
Nice move, Dad.
Set up an emergency fund. So this can be a little daunting when you start out, because you might not have any savings, you might have a little bit of debt from college. You read a lot of things online, and it might say, 6 months of funds. You're like, well, how am I going to put 6 months aside? I'm barely paying the bills as it is. My thoughts on someone who just recently graduated is just try to set up, 1 month of spending. So if you figure out you spend, let's say, $3,000 a month or $4,000 a month, just try to start with that and have that amount kind of set aside in your bank account. Maybe you set up a separate savings account with that, but at least 1 month to start. And then as you start reaching savings targets, then you can start, which we'll get to a little bit, which is, saving in your retirement account at work and maybe a Roth IRA. Then we can talk further about, moving that to 3 months. But I think it's really important just to have that money set aside, because there are going to be unexpected expenses. Like you have health insurance, you might go to the doctor and it might have a deductible where you have to pay $1,000 or $2,000 for that visit. Or you might get a car accident and you have to pay $2,000 to, for the insurance deductible on your auto policy. So it's important to at least have that 1 month set up to start with, and then you can look to build that over time as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is the buffer to prevent you from having to go to the credit card, right, in emergencies. And when you're young, it needs to be in the bank account format. I mean, many times, that baby step idea from a very famous financial teacher out there, this is a big one for that, and getting at least $1,000 set up if you can. And that of course is going to change over time with inflation, but if you can get that set up, it's a great just comfort level, peace of mind aspect too when you're going about your daily life, setting things up financially.
Okay. Yeah, so set up the emergency fund is the second item. The next one is really automate as much as you can. I mean, I think there's a lot of research and studies that show that the less you have to think, the better you do. I hate to say it, but if you have to, we talked about the credit cards. If you have to think about when you have to make the payment, you may be on vacation, you may have busy work or family issues, and you may miss that payment. Well, automate that credit card payment. You may have just graduated. You might have student loans. Automate the monthly payment of the student loans. Savings. Now it's been much better than when, Chad and I graduated in terms of things like your 401k. It happens automatically. Set that up to, go out of your paycheck every time, every 2 weeks or twice a month you get paid, going into the 401k. And then the same thing, we'll talk a little bit what a Roth IRA is, but that's also another savings account that can help for long-term growth as well. So, it's a target, 15 to 20% of your gross income. It'd be great if you could save that much by automating. We understand, out of college, you may say, I only can save 5%. Well, great. 5% is better than zero. So it's great to start somewhere. And then also in automating, if you say, my emergency fund, it's not enough yet. Well, that's another place. You could automate, transfers to your savings account that's going to be your emergency fund, and make sure that, that happens on a monthly or weekly or daily basis. So, automate as much as you can. The less you have to think, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, you think about how many decisions you're making on a daily basis, right? There's many studies and topics of conversation that get thrown around about decision fatigue. That can be a real thing, and it can prevent you from doing these things. It's easy to forget certain things, certain practices if they're not automated. So this was one of the best things I did when I first started out, was just setting up an automatic contribution into a Roth IRA. Right. If it doesn't have to be a Roth, but if you're earning money, that can be a great start. It can be a small amount too. They make it so easy that today, it could be $25 a month, $50 a month, anything to get you started off on the right foot. It puts time on your side as well, that we're going to talk about with just the compounding of investments. So.
Okay. Well, automate. Mm-hmm. The next one is, you think about, you were in college, you didn't have much money. Which most, at least I didn't have. I don't know if you did. You're lucky, but I didn't have much money. So there wasn't really worrying about spending or trying to get by on a daily basis. But now maybe you got a job, you're making, about more than you expected. You don't have a lot of fixed costs. You don't have any kids yet. Maybe not married. What we recommend is, and this a lot of research supports it, is spending your money more on experiences and relationships and less on stuff. Material purchases won't make you happier in the long run. Yes, at the time it feels great. Hey, I'm going to buy that new fancy car. But the reality is, still just gets you from the same place, point A to point B. The monthly payments might be more. The insurance is going to be more expensive. You might have to pay for premium gas. It's more expensive, home maintenance on the car. So those big material purchases, I would not, go overboard on those, because experiences give you the best bang for the buck. That is the vacation you're looking forward to. My wife is looking to take the kids to Taylor Swift, which says where we're at today. And that's a big, experience that kids will never forget. So focus on those experiences with friends and family more than buying stuff. And then also a lot of people focus on, I didn't have a car, I didn't go to Starbucks today, or, I drove across town to save a few pennies on gas, which helps. So don't get me wrong, that's not bad. But really what we see is the big things that really count. The type of car you drive. Are you buying, a brand new, top of the line, expensive luxury car? Or are you buying a basic, car that gets you from point A to point B? That's a big impact. The home, are you stretching to buy the home, or are you buying something that just, works within your budget? How expensive the vacation are going to be? So these big purchases, I think people kind of will jump into, which can make a big impact, how much you spend there as well. And then finally, if you do want to kind of see where the money's going, which I think is good perspective from awareness, monitoring your spending, there are a number of online apps. We're not going to go through them today, but you can obviously Google it. You'll find a number of online apps that can track your spending. Or the other option is to do what a lot of folks do, as we talked before, is you automate your savings, you automate your payments, and then whatever's left over is you have to spend. So either option works. It's just whatever is best in your situation.
As with many things in personal finance, I think balance is an important aspect. And when you're young, picking the experiences to spend extravagantly on may be difficult because you have a limited amount of resources, right? As Mike was talking about. But that's also part of the fun, because many of your friends are going to be in a similar circumstance. So you can select activities based on that. But man, many of the memories I built in college and just after college are still sticking and paying what we'd call memory dividends. And that's from the book, Die with Zero. Also, the book, Happy Money. I think Mike mentions that in his video. You could go back and watch How I Invest My Money, right? And experiences continue to be a theme throughout many of the conversations we have with clients 20, 30, 40 years down the road, even retirees, right, is they've been delaying a lot of experiences because of the busyness of life. So as many as you can get in early on, You'll remember them for a long time. But balance that with the other tips that we're giving you as well.
Yep. So spend that money on experiences. You will not regret them. The next item is really about building what's called a credit score. It's also a FICO score. It's very important because having a solid credit score, and the typical, I think the ranges are somewhere from it's up to 850. I don't know where the low side goes, but typically you see some 400, 500, 600 to 850. The higher your score is, the more likely you'll be approved for a loan. And also the lower your interest rate typically is, the better your score. So that could save you, depending on the size of the loan, tens or even thousands of dollars in borrowing. And that's the interest cost. So it's important. And how can you improve that credit score? Well, obviously, we talk about the bills. You got to pay your bills on time. That's your credit card, utility bills, student loans, paying those on time. You can monitor your credit score. There's free apps like Credit Karma. You can also, get it online, go to annualcreditreport.org, and they can get that once a year, I believe, maybe more now, but once a year to see how your credit is doing, make sure there's no outstanding debt you're not aware of. But we've also included a link here which has more tips on, improving your credit. But I think it's just important to, not have late payments, not cancel too many credit cards because it looks bad, but just make sure that, that credit score is something you focus on.
Yeah, and a big message here is don't be afraid of using a credit card because you're scared about having to pay interest or missing payments, right? It's important to implement that discipline. That's part of, and you could do it with just small purchases, right? To start building the ability that businesses can trust your ability to pay off. And that's what this is about. So ultimately buying the house down the road and things of that nature. So start small, but start, right?
Yes, your future self will thank you if you focus on your credit score when you're young.
Yes.
All right. Moving forward, the next one is get the company match. And so you're probably thinking, if you haven't started working yet, or maybe you're working at a smaller employer, you're like, what does that mean? But a lot of times, a lot of employers will offer a company retirement account. Very common is what's called a 401k, and they will match a certain percentage of your contribution. So, for example, if you contribute 6%, they'll match up to 6% of it. So that's what we look at as free money. If you contribute 4%, you just lost out on 2% of free money. And if you make, let's say, $50,000 a year, that's $1,000 you could have got for doing just increasing your contribution from 4 to 6, and you did nothing. So that's the first thing is we love you to contribute more, but at least contribute as much to your company retirement account to get the company match.
Agreed. And another point on that one in particular is make sure it's being invested in something other than the money market account or the stable value account or the cash account in the 401k, because that's a mistake that can cost you the compounding over time. Same goes for other investment accounts as well, but that one is an important one.
No, that's a great point, Chad. We'll get to investment approach when you're young as well in a few slides, but there's something called a target date retirement account fund, which we'll talk about in a bit, is probably your focus at this point in your life. In addition to the company match, we talked briefly earlier, is there's something called a Roth IRA that is what I call the Swiss Army knife of retirement accounts, because there's so many different things you can use it for. It can be used for retirement, but the contributions can be withdrawn at any time, tax and penalty free, which is great. So that $6,500 can be withdrawn at any time. And then in addition, the money can be invested, it can grow without paying, tax on interest, dividends, or capital gains. So in addition to the 401k, we'd recommend trying to reach the max on a Roth IRA. And that limit, $6,500, does change on an annual basis.
Yeah, agreed. This is the way I was able to start early on. I love the idea of building this account. It just gives you a lot of flexibility and establishes the discipline. So a great one to start with, the old Swiss Army knife.
And speaking of taxes, this is not something to forget about.
Taxes matter?
They do. They do. I think, as my daughter was always complaining when she gets paid, like, what is it? Yeah. What are they withholding here? My pay stub? I'm like, well, those are what's called taxes.
Yeah.
So I think for those that have had a job so far, they understand how it works. Like, they pay you $15 an hour. You're probably not making $15 an hour. You're making less taxes. So taxes do matter, and they add up over time. It's important as a recent college graduate or a 20-year-old, you understand how they work. So it'd be good to do your taxes at least once to see how a tax return is set up, what makes you pay more in taxes, what makes you pay less in taxes. After that, you can obviously hire an expert if you'd like, but that's something to at least get an understanding of what to do or potentially benefits with taxes. But keep in mind, take advantage of deductions and credits. If you have student loans, there might be some opportunities there. Some credits if you have some children. So there are opportunities there to make sure you take advantage of. But the last thing I'll mention is some folks, Chad and I see kind of real time, they might have an investment that doesn't make sense for them now, but they don't want to sell it because of taxes, which we don't want those, taxes matter, but typically, over the long term, the investment results matter more than the taxes. So don't let those taxes impact your investment decisions.
Yeah, and a couple aspects here is understanding how different accounts benefit you. So a 401k, if you have an option to pick pre-tax or a Roth option, right? The pre-tax contributions will save you from paying tax now. But if you're in a low tax bracket, then maybe it makes more sense to do the Roth. So that's where sometimes talking with your HR department or someone you trust, a financial professional, can help you to make the right choice to start out. But getting started is ultimately the most important thing. But thinking through how these different accounts, the health savings account's another option. When you're young, you likely have a high deductible health insurance policy. With your employer, you may have a health savings account option. Just understanding all of these differences, and we've gone into more detail in other episodes that you can search on our website in the magnifying glass on the top right if you have questions on those particular topics. But that is what understanding how taxes work with your retirement savings is.
Yes, taxes matter. Now, we haven't talked yet about investing because I think to begin with, when you're young, savings is much more important than investing. And that's why it's later in the presentation than the beginning. But when you do save, you have investment decisions. And so the first thing is why invest? So, right? First of all, because you just keep the money in the bank and the balance stays the same, maybe a little bit of interest. But there's something called inflation. And so historically, U.S. inflation has averaged about 3% a year. And if that happens, your money is cut in half in about 20 years. When I say your money is cut in half, the purchasing power. So your ability to buy groceries, gas, what it could buy today in about 20 years is about half as much. So you want your money to grow, invest it, so that the purchasing power of that money keeps up with inflation. You also invest for a future goal. Maybe you have a goal to buy a new home. You have a big vacation you want to do in 5 years. You, at some point, want to stop working. You have a goal, and that's another reason to invest as well. And then finally, as we briefly mentioned before, when you're starting out, you're young, you probably don't have a lot in investments or savings. You really want to use what's called a target date retirement fund. And they'll have those in your 401k or a Roth IRA. And that allows you to they invest really the funds for you based on how long you want to work. So let's say you want to work another 40 years, you might pick the 2060 retirement fund, and that does all the hard work, a lot of the work for you. Now, as your assets grow, that's where a financial planner can help more advice on that. But to start with, it's a great place to start. And then finally, I wish I could have gone back, told myself this 20 plus years ago, is don't try to time the market. You're young. It doesn't matter. Just save as much as you can, as often as you can. I always like to comment when you should invest, when you have the money. When you should sell is when you need the money. The rest is just noise.
Yeah, and you're going to be in conversations with people where they're bragging about certain investments. People always love to talk about their best investments, right? So remember, there's always some bad ones hidden behind the scenes in the shadows that may not be talked about as much. But like Mike said, just getting started, something in addition to the emergency fund so that you can take advantage of that compound growth at higher returns, which matters so much over the long run. And we've got a great another podcast on our investing principles. If you wanted to go a little deeper, that could give you some high level thoughts, investment beliefs, ideas that can get you started and maybe give you some confidence moving along your journey.
And that's a good point, Chad. We don't recommend investing your emergency fund. That should be in the bank, but these are funds outside the emergency fund. So, and this is just an example from JP Morgan. We always find helpful. I like to show, we have interns here in the office. We like to show this page just to kind of show them the importance of starting when they're young. What this is doing is looking at 4 scenarios of individuals saving about $200 a month. And the summary is for the individual that started when they were 25 and saved $200 a month until they were 65, they ended up with far more money than the other 3 individuals who either started when they're young and then stopped, or started saving when they're later, or saved, but just saved in the bank account. So the money didn't grow proportionally. So for example, the consistent saver and investor ended with over $512,000. The consistent saver who didn't invest, who saved the same amount, ended with $158,000. So that shows the long-term impact of compound interest, that almost $400,000 difference between the two.
Yeah, it's that great old Rolling Stone song, right? Time is on your side.
There you go.
Time is on my side. Sorry.
We're dating ourselves here, but yes.
That's the theme involved in this graph. And I love the motivation behind this. It's really what got me started in this whole career path I'm in. I think is the magic of compounding and getting started early. So
yes, I would say if you're not clear on this, I would pause the recording and just take a look at this in detail, because this is a very powerful page and impact your long-term wealth on these investment decisions that are made. All right, so we talked about investing, we talked about savings. So now it's probably not the most exciting topic, but it's insuring against the big risks. Yeah. So these big risks are things like you go to the hospital, you have a large hospital bill, you get disabled, you get in a car accident, all your personal belongings are stolen from your rental apartment or house. And so that's where you can buy insurance. So insurance is a cost. You're not looking to make money on insurance. You're looking to reduce that big risk. And so those are things like we mentioned, health insurance, disability insurance. A lot of employers will offer it as part of being an employee. We highly recommend at least getting long-term disability insurance, because at a young age, you're much more likely to be disabled than to pass away. Auto insurance, obviously, if you have a car, it's important. You're required by law, but at least to have that auto insurance to make sure if anything would happen or you get in an accident. And then the renter's insurance, obviously, if your product or your personal possessions were stolen and not have to replace everything. Now, a lot of people talk about life insurance, but being young and out of college in your 20s, if no one depends on your income, like you're not married, you don't have a child, you probably don't need it. So don't feel like just because you started working that you need life insurance, because if no one depends on your income to survive, you do not need life insurance. So
yeah, I mean, and the earlier you can get life insurance is a big theme. It's going to be cheaper. But if you don't need it, it's an extra cost. So doing the analysis there on if it's term, some kind of term life insurance, especially when you're thinking about getting married, could be a great investment early on, because the longer you wait, the more expensive the premiums are going to be in that situation. So yeah, good to talk to an insurance agent maybe at that point, or a financial advisor. Yeah.
It's a great time to ask family or friends for a trusted insurance agent, and they can help you figure out what makes most sense for your situation.
Agreed.
All right. So I think this might be the last one before we walk through the next items, is never stop learning. So we talked about, invest in yourself, but when you're young, ask a lot of questions, especially if you work at an employer. You want to ask, because I think as both Chad and I know that, we really value the employees that ask questions and want to learn more. Attend industry events. If there's an opportunity either locally or nationally to go meet other peers in your industry and learn more about what they're doing. And I think that's a great opportunity to help kind of improve your network. And read a lot of books. I mean, there's a lot of information now with podcasts and blogs. It's a lot of, quick, news articles. But the reality is you really don't get the books give you the most benefit. So read more books. You will be happy about that after the fact. And then it's helpful to get a mentor. I think that was helpful early in my career. Someone that looks out for you, that someone provides advice, someone that gives you ideas of what you can do better, what you can improve upon. But just never stop learning. Always find ways to improve. You never reach the top. There's always things you can be doing better. So that's kind of my key recommendation there.
Yeah, there's a thread through these four, really, is surrounding yourself with a group of people that can challenge you and you can learn from, right? They can teach you how to ask better questions. They can share answers with you, providing resources in the book area. Going to industry events is the way you get connected potentially to people that are having the same ideas as you, and then you can find mentors there. So I think all four of these can be great multipliers to your investments in yourself of higher earnings down the road.
So additional resources. So the purpose of this was to make it a relatively quick recording podcast, so you don't have to go read all the books or the blogs. But if you say, I'm really interested, I want to learn more, where else can I look? So we got some links here. We got blogs. The Humble Dollar blog by a guy named Jonathan Clements is one of my favorite financial authors. So information out there that him and his contributors provide. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but the Financial Symmetry blog is where Chad and I work. So we provide weekly information that is free and available for everyone to look at, called financialsymmetry.com. The College Investor, I think, is a good one, which I've used before for kind of a younger savers. He has good information out there that would help you kind of see, for bank accounts or what credit cards to pick, or some of the basic information. I think is a good place to start as well. Speaking of books, there are some books in terms of, and there's no particular order. All these are helpful. Saving for retirement. Talk a little bit more about what we talked about today, as well a little bit more into the investing perspective by Ben Carlson. I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. So obviously he's popular. He's got his own Netflix show today, but information there could be helpful as well. The book that I first read out of college was Millionaire Next Door, which really changed my view on money and life. And that really the view there was like the people that have the fancy cars and the nice house might actually not have the money. I know it's shocking, right? But that book, which is a little older now, but it's still the resources and the information are as valuable today as they were when it was first written in the late 90s. Chad had referenced Happy Money book. That talks about the best places to spend your money. That's what we talked about, experiences and relationships. And then finally, thinking about a career value, this is one that I read early in my career that I loved as well, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think this was written in the 20s by Dale Carnegie. Now they have updated versions today, but just if you are starting a job as an employee, working with others is going to be very important to the success of your career. And this provides a lot of information on the best approaches to do that.
And I think you can always get better at that. And that book I read early on as well, and has been a great thing to reference. I have referenced back to through the years, because that is how ultimately you build a network around you that can pour back into you as well as you're moving along in your journey. But these are great resources. We'll have them linked on our blog on the show notes for this particular episode that you can go reference.
Well, great. So conclude, keep it simple. Try to save at least 10% of your gross income. We said 15 to 20%, but if you can save more than 10%, that's a great place to start. Automate as much as you can, automate everything, and then really get out of your own way. You're going to hear a lot of information. There's going to be so-called experts that say, do this or do that. Don't focus on what you can control and not what you can't control. I think that's the biggest thing that we take away as our day jobs, is that a lot of people get stuck in the weeds and just focus on the big picture on what the saving, you automate, you insure against a big risk, and things will work out over the long term. And be patient, because your money's not going to grow overnight. It's going to take time, but the little things you do today will add up. But then if you listen to this and you're thinking, you're like, this is a little more complicated. I don't know if I'm able to figure this out. You can hire a fee-only financial planner. That's what Chad and us do at Financial Symmetry. We also have 12 advisors in total that help in this with people like you. And, there are organizations also you can look at called NAPA, their online site, where you can find advisors in your area that are fee only. They don't sell any products. They don't accept any commissions. And then especially for younger folks, a very popular part of NAPA is called the XBI-PN network. And they typically charge, not based on the assets you have, because you probably get just starting out, but they charge kind of like a cell phone bill, a monthly bill, sorry. And that bill is based upon, might be, I need help with my student loans, or I may need help with how much I should be saving, or I need help with budgeting. And so that bill, which is like your cell phone, can be very valuable over the long term. I look at it as more of a fee, more of an investment than a fee. So that's kind of my conclusion for the topics there.
Yeah, I would add 3 ideas generally when you're thinking about that, of when you're ready, maybe, right? It's generally, do you have the time? Do you have the interest? And do you have the knowledge? And sometimes for people, it may just be one of those things that's a catalyst to contact an advisor. For others, it may be all 3, right? So determine where you're at on the scale of each one of those things before, and maybe that can be your best judge of when it's time to reach out for an advisor. But if you find any stopping point or hitting any caution lights on things that stop you from getting started, I think that's a great resource to have somebody in your corner as an accountability partner, just as you would a personal trainer, right? So good luck, and we wish you much happiness and savings ability, getting started on the right foot and building all these steps. We have over 190, I think, different articles probably on our website. I'm sorry, articles, like over 600 now. Podcast episodes, we're getting close to 190. So, and many YouTube videos, a lot of resources. Happy to answer questions. Thanks for all the feedback. Hope this is helpful in getting you started off on the right foot.
Thanks, everyone. And if you're a parent, please share this with your child or friend of a child so they get them started as well. I appreciate listening.